I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. On today's show, we're back with 5 USMNT questions that have been on my mind this week. We'll start by breaking down which U.S. internationals stood out for their clubs this weekend, then get into some of the toughest roster decisions that Mauricio Pochettino will have to make ahead of the World Cup. To help me today, I've invited Seth Vertelny to join the show. Seth is the soccer editor at USA Today Sports. So Seth, let's start with some of the standout performances from U.S. internationals over the weekend. Who's a player that impressed you with their club performance?
Yeah, I think this is an answer that I could have given many times over the last several weeks, but I have to start with Fuller and Balogun at Monaco. Even though Monaco's win streak ended this weekend, they lost 4-1 to Paris FC. Balogun scored again. That's 7 consecutive league games with a goal for Balogun, who, I think we've seen over his career, he's really a streaky scorer. He'll go, several weeks without scoring, and then all of a sudden he'll score a bunch of goals in a row. And right now he is on a streak unlike any that we've really seen in his career. It kind of goes back to that season that he had on loan at Rennes a few years ago, where he scored 21 goals, I believe, and got himself a $40 million move to Monaco. And finally, we're kind of starting to see that Balogun back again. And in fact, this one I think is a little better because a lot of those goals that he scored a few years ago were penalties. He's not really taking penalties this year. I think he only has 2 goals from the spot. And so he's really in incredible form. And of course, for the U.S. national team, it's great to see so close to the World Cup.
Yeah, he's peaking at the right time, and he got off to kind of a slow start at Monaco. I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is his 3rd season there, and they were a little disappointed with him the first couple. Had some injuries, he used to take penalties. He'd missed a lot of penalties, but now he's just cranking in the goals like everybody kind of expected him to. And it's just really good to see. Do you think, in your mind, is he just going to be like in the starting 11? Like, is he just a no-brainer starting 11 for you day one of the World Cup against Paraguay?
Yeah, it's hard to see Pochettino picking anybody else to start at the 9. I think we saw against Portugal, Pochettino decided to give Christian Pulisic a start at striker, which didn't work very well. So I guess there's always the potential for some kind of experimentation. But at this point, I can't see any of the other striker options overtaking Balogun on the depth chart. He's been pretty productive with the U.S. as well as with Monaco. He didn't score in this most recent window, but he was scoring pretty regularly in 2025 when he was in the lineup. And yeah, right now he seems like the clear option at the number 9 for the U.S.
Yeah, you never know what Poch is going to do. Poch, he's one that's going to always surprise us. But Balogun has been a pretty consistent starter for him going all the way back to the fall. I think this Pulisic experiment was just an experiment that he just wanted to try, and so I'd be shocked if Balogun's name wasn't on the lineup card when it got released, on the day of the match. Another guy that stood out to me is another striker for the U.S., Ricardo Pepi. He scored a goal this weekend. I was maybe a little worried about him, because the previous week he did not get the start for PSV. The manager kind of went back to I think a starting lineup that had been working well for PSV in the past. Pepe was on the bench. PSV clinched the title last week, and I'm like, okay, how are they going to use Pepe in the remaining part of the season? Because he's this like $40 million asset now that looks like they're going to sell to Fulham, this summer or some other team. Would they want to protect him? Would they want to get him a run of games? He got the start this weekend. I think he played 80 some minutes, scored a nice goal. So it was really good to see him on the, just scoring a goal again. Do you think especially we'll talk about Agyemang's injury in a little bit, but with Agyemang's injury, is Pepe's World Cup spot all but certain now, or do you still think he has to play his way in there?
Yeah, I'd say with Agyemang healthy, Pepe was a little bit of a doubt for me, just based on how little he played in March. I would have thought that Pepe was number 2 on the depth chart behind Balogun, but Haji Wright was injured in March, so it's hard to know exactly where he is on the depth chart. But Agyemang was clearly ahead of Pepe, at least in March, and I would have still bet on Pepe making the World Cup squad, even with Agyemang healthy. But of course, with the injury to Agyemang, it seems almost a lock now that Pepe's going to be there. It's hard to imagine a striker other than Pepe Wright or Balogun making the team. I think there's a pretty big drop off after those three. I think number 4 probably at this point is still Josh Sargent, but it seems like he has not managed to convince Pochettino at the international level, and then at the club level, things have been so up in the air for him over the last several months. Not playing at Norwich for a while, getting sold to Toronto, and taking some time to get up to speed there. So it's hard to see him overtaking Pepe or Wright on the depth chart. But we'll see what happens. You never know. There's still a couple months to go, but those to me seem to be the clear 3: Pepe, Balogun, and Wright.
Yeah, I agree with you. That got a whole lot more clear after Agyemang's injury, and it seems like Pepe's going to be there outside of getting injured. I'd be super surprised if he's not there. Okay, let's flip the table a little bit. Who's a U.S. international who did not impress you over the weekend or seemed to struggle a little bit?
Yeah, I'll start with Malik Tillman. It's not that he didn't impress me. It's just he didn't play very much. He came on in the last couple minutes of Leverkusen's win at Dortmund, and this is a trend that we've seen with him over the last few weeks, where he hasn't played against some of the better teams that Leverkusen has played against. And, he's still been playing pretty regularly, getting minutes off the bench. He scored in a couple games in a row leading up to that Dortmund game, but it does concern me a little bit because he was Leverkusen's club record signing in the offseason, and you would think for a player that the club invested that much in, they would want him to be playing in some of these big games. I still think that he's had a decent season. Like, it hasn't been overwhelming in any way, but he has done enough, I think, to show his quality there. But seeing him not play in some of these games is a little bit of a concern. One player who did play but didn't have a very good game was Anthony Robinson. He started against Liverpool, but just wasn't really effective on either end of the field. His crossing was off. He didn't really contribute to many attacks. And then he had a couple bad giveaways in the back. He struggled with Mohamed Salah, and he actually got pulled off with 30 minutes to go, which is pretty rare for him over the last few years. Seeing him not go the full 90 when he plays, it just hasn't been a very good year for him. Of course, he's kind of had these injury issues crop up, but he seems healthy now, and he just isn't really hitting the same heights that he has over the past few years, when I think a lot of people would have said he is, one of, if not the best left backs in the Premier League. I don't think it's going to really affect his stats with the US too much. I think he's still a lock starter if he's healthy, but I think his form is a little bit of a concern for sure.
Yeah, because there seems to be quite a bit of a drop-off after him on the depth chart. I mean, Max Arsene seems to be the next guy up, but he seems like a guy maybe you'd only play if you're playing a, I don't know, quote unquote weaker opponent or a team where you think you're going to have the ball, most of the time. So it does seem like Robinson's position is pretty safe. I do think Tillman's, though, he's really lost his he's not a regular starter for Leverkusen anymore. I mean, it just seems like most times when I pull up their starting lineup before a game, he doesn't seem to be in it very often, anymore. And he's a guy that it seems like Pochettino wants to start, and be a big contributor to the team. I mean, he started both matches in March, but if he continues just to come on really late, as a sub for Leverkusen the rest of the year, I don't know how you put him in the starting lineup for the U.S. men's national team. I marked a couple guys, Miles Robinson and Mark McKenzie. Miles Robinson didn't play. He's injured, so he missed out on playing again. Mark McKenzie got a red card for Toulouse over the weekend, and I just think that these guys, the center back pool it's so wide open even now. I think outside of like Chris Richards and Tim Ream, I think they're locks in Pochettino's mind. But with Austin Trusty's emergence, in the March camp, and he's been playing so well, one of these guys, like Miles Robinson, Mark McKenzie, I'm thinking of, who else am I thinking of? Who's the five that normally comes in? You got Richards, Ream, McKenzie, Miles Robinson, and then I'm missing a guy. I can't think of him. Austin Trusty was the guy last March. But, you have like Blackman, who's been in before, who I don't really know how much Pochettino rates him, but I wouldn't want to be one of these center backs on the edge of the lineup, because I can see one of these guys getting bumped, at the last minute if they're injured, not playing much, or playing poorly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to look at, if Pochettino is going with the back three, I think probably the next on the list are guys like Alex Freeman,
That's true.
or Joe Scally, guys that can play on the right side of a back three. They might be the next up to take the place of a guy like Miles Robinson or Mark McKenzie.
Yeah. I've thought Robinson was pretty much a lock because he does get a lot of playing time under Pochettino. But I mean, if you have this lingering, I think it's a groin injury or something like that. If you have this lingering injury and you're just not getting minutes, and I don't know, it could put you at risk. So these center backs seem to have a lot on the line week in and week out in these last couple weeks before Pochettino names a roster.
Yeah, it's not a very encouraging picture, I would say, if you're a U.S. national team fan. Outside of Chris Richards, there's just a lot of question marks.
Yeah. Okay, well, we kind of hinted at this. Biggest news last week was probably Patrick Agyemang's Achilles injury. He's out of the World Cup. I had him as already having booked his ticket, for the World Cup. Sounds like you did too. I mean, he seemed to be Pochettino's number 2 striker. A lot of folks didn't like that, but I mean, Pochettino consistently went to him as one of the earliest subs off the bench. In the past year, he's been doing that consistently. So with Agyemang out now, who do you think takes his roster spot?
Yeah, I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier. To me, there were 4 guys that were battling for 3 forward spots before the injury in Balogun, Agyemang, Pepe, and Wright. And really, it was more like 3 guys battling for 2 spots because Balogun's a lock. So it really was kind of Agyemang and Wright and Pepe going for those 2 spots. It seems pretty straightforward that now it would be Wright, Pepe, and Balogun getting the call. I thought even with Agyemang healthy, Pochettino could have decided to bring all four of those guys because Wright has the ability to play out wide. Now you're seeing him, in that case, go up against guys like Alex Dejas or Brendan Aronson for a roster spot. Now it seems like those three are kind of the no-brainer picks. I mentioned Josh Sargent. I mean, I guess there's a chance he could get hot over the next month in MLS. He's kind of had a slow start with Toronto, but yeah, really, it seems pretty straightforward, and it's really unfortunate for Agyemang. Even though he's like pretty much a newcomer on the scene, he's already 25. So when you think about missing this World Cup, who knows where he's going to be next time around. He's kind of a late bloomer. So I think there's every opportunity if he can recover fitness from this injury that he can be part of the group next cycle. But this really did kind of seem like his big chance to kind of get in there and play significant minutes in a World Cup, and you wonder where he's going to be in 4 years' time. So it's definitely a big blow, and you got to feel for him because he's had just like such an amazing rise over the last year or two.
Yeah, it's been incredible, his rise. So even if, let's say, Poch was going to bring four strikers before Agyemang's injury, do you think it's more likely now that he continues bringing in a four striker like Josh Sargent, or do you think it's more likely he just adds depth in another position, like one of the attackers, central midfield, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if he was going to bring more attackers, it would make sense to bring in a guy like Alex Dejas, who's maybe a little bit on the outside looking in. I mean, when you look at their pure number nines, like the guys that they have called in over the last year, guys like Brian White, kind of hard to see him making the World Cup squad. Damian Downs, who might have been in the picture if he didn't have a terrible club season this year. He hasn't scored a single goal. He was, in England, Southampton. That didn't work out. Now he's back in Germany on loan with Hamburg. And so, yeah, I think if you're looking at adding more attackers, I think guys on the wing would make more sense given you have three guys that can play as a nine. Another guy who's been kind of making a name for himself more and more over the last several weeks is Xavier Gozo. I've seen a few people talk about him as maybe a kind of a wild card World Cup option. I mean, it's still hard to see Pochettino bringing in an uncapped 19-year-old, but you never know with a 26-man roster. You can take a flyer on a guy like that, and clearly we've seen in MLS, he has the ability to do some things that I think very few people in the U.S. pool can do. So I wouldn't fully rule him out, even though it's pretty unlikely, I think.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unlikely Sargent or another striker, make it in unless they really heat up. I think it's more like, there's all these guys on the edge, like, Zendejas, Brendan Aronson, Diego Luna, Gio Reyna, that are kind of like, maybe of those four guys, there was only going to be one or two spots. Well, maybe now there's an extra spot. Maybe an extra one of them, makes it in, or maybe Aiden Morris makes it in. It's a central midfielder because Poch wanted to bring Cardoso in and he got bumped a little bit. But nonetheless, Poch's decision just got a lot easier for him because I'm sure that was one of the heaviest decisions he was going to have to make when it was those four strikers was, do I bring in four and not have depth at another position? And if I decide to bring in only three, how do I cut one of these guys? Because like you said, outside of Balogun, the other three guys seem to be, you can make a case for any of them, Another guy, and I just kind of alluded to him, Johnny Cardoso. He's another guy that, there's some debate on whether he will make it in the roster, whether he's earned a spot, on the roster. From what I read yesterday, he was injured. He's back in training this week with Atletico. It looks like he could play in their Champions League tie against Barcelona on Tuesday in the quarterfinal. where do you stand on him? Is he in your roster right now, or do you think he still has to play his way in?
Yeah, I mean the US player pool has come a long way over the last 10, 15, 20 years, but I still think it's pretty hard to imagine the US leaving a player who's starting regularly for Atletico Madrid off their World Cup roster. Now I know that Johnny hasn't done too much with the US and the opportunities that he's had. I actually thought he looked pretty good in the first half against Belgium a couple weeks ago before he suffered another minor injury. I mean, that's been a problem with him with the U.S. as well as just not really playing well. His injuries pretty much limited him to only a couple brief appearances at the Gold Cup last year. But yeah, even though center midfield is a pretty deep position, probably the deepest position that the U.S. has, I think Cardozo has done enough to put himself on the right side of the bubble if he's healthy, of course. I think when you look at the guys that he's competing with, Aiden Morris has had a really good club season as well. But I think like Cardozo, he's struggled to take advantage of his chances with the U.S. Christian Roldan, I think he's on the bubble as well. Sebastian Berhalter. It does get pretty crowded in that position because we know that Pochettino likes Roldan a lot. We know that he likes Berhalter a lot. Can he bring Roldan, Berhalter, and Johnny and Tanner Tessman? That's a lot of names in there. But again, with the 26-man roster, I do see Cardozo being there if he's fit.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy, I said last week on the show, I'm done with him. Pretty much like I don't trust the guy. I'm not bringing him in. I'm not going to hope that he can play for the U.S. In the World Cup because he just hasn't shown up and done well. But I do, after giving it some more thought, he's about to play. They're up 2-0 against Barcelona in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. It's likely they're going to win and be playing in the semifinals of the Champions League. And if Cardoso continues to start for them and he's playing in the Champions League semifinals and potentially beyond, it can be hard. I can see how it would be super hard to leave off a guy, like that. But this is another one of those things where he could just bring in some extra central midfielders, instead of bringing in the 4 strikers with Agyemang, maybe now he brings in an extra central midfielder because there's a lot. Those guys get injured a lot. I mean, you think about Cardoso seems injured a lot. Tyler Adams is injured a lot. So maybe, some extra insurance there would help, right? I do think this is going to be another one of those, last week before the roster gets announced, Pochettino's in the, conference room with his coaching staff trying to nail these last few decisions. I feel like Cardoso, whether to bring him or not, could be one of them.
Yeah, and another guy I didn't mention even is Yunus Musa, and I still think Yunus Musa could help this team at a World Cup, but it just seems like he's completely fallen out of the picture for Pochettino, and I can't fully blame him because this loan to Atalanta has been pretty much disastrous. So Musa probably isn't going to be on this squad, but I still think, he has the quality to help. I mean, this is a guy that started every game at a World Cup 3.5 years ago at age 20. So, there's a good player in there. It just hasn't fully been unlocked recently.
Yeah. Imagine if both Musa and Cardoso got left off, that leaving off that kind of talent, to your point of how far this U.S. team has come over the last, decade. Okay, last question for you, Seth. Let's look ahead now. When you look ahead this next week or two, who's the U.S. international you're going to be keeping a really close eye on?
Yeah, I guess the first one has to be Christian Pulisic. There was kind of a developing story around him more and more over the course of the last several weeks about his goal drought, not just at the club level, but for country. He hasn't scored for the U.S. since 2024. He hasn't scored for Milan since 2025. Milan had a pretty terrible result this weekend. They lost 3-0 to Udinese. Their title challenge is over, and now it's kind of about finishing in the top four and securing a Champions League spot. Obviously, Pulisic is going to want to end this goal drought. He scored 10 goals in the first half of the season, and so it just seems like he hasn't been getting some luck lately. There sometimes it's just a player goes through these moments, and I actually thought he played pretty well against Udinese. He could have had a couple of assists at least on a different day. So I'll be watching to see if he can end that drought. Of course, he's not going to want to go into the World Cup having not scored a goal since 2025. So he's really going to want to get at least one or two, but also just continue to play well, put in good performances, because he's had a few of those with Milan, even though it hasn't resulted in any goals since 2025. But with the U.S., yeah, he wasn't great in those two March friendlies, so he's going to want to build up some momentum. Another guy that I'm going to watch is Gio Reyna. Of course, I'm not sure if I'm going to watch him because just
you're not going to be watching much.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be watching his mannerisms and body language on the bench. It's interesting with him because I think when he was named to the March roster, it kind of seemed like an indication that he was going to be on the World Cup squad no matter what. Like if he's not playing at all at the club level and still makes that March roster, and Pochettino spoke about how he was making an exception for him because he's just a really talented player. You said, all right, well, maybe it doesn't matter what he does at the club level. He's on the World Cup squad. But, he didn't play too much in March, certainly didn't have much of an impact on either game. And then he goes back to his club, and one game he played 5 minutes off the bench. And then this weekend he didn't play again. And all of a sudden you say to yourself, if he really just doesn't play at all the rest of the season, maybe he isn't on the World Cup squad. Like it's hard to see Pochettino taking a player who has like less than half of soccer in the entire calendar year of 2026 to the World Cup. So I'm definitely curious to see if Gio can get any kind of club playing time over the next few weeks.
Yeah. It's just so hard for me to justify how you could bring him, at this stage. I mean, I know he brought him in March, which didn't make sense to me then either. But I mean, if it continues as kind of you just mentioned, like we're talking 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, I just don't see how you could bring him. I'll be shocked. I mean, but you never know. I mean, maybe he's impressed Poch so much with his, ceiling, or what he might do that he brings him. It takes fire on him.
Yeah, again, I think the 26-man roster is helpful. You can bring somebody different, somebody who has the ability in theory to change a game off the bench. But yeah, I mean, he's played like 30 minutes this entire year since 2026. So it's whatever happens at the international level, it's been just another disappointing year for Reyna at the club level, and we were kind of hoping to see a change of scenery turn his fortunes around at the club level, and it just has been more of the same, just minor injuries and not getting enough playing time when he's healthy.
Yeah. I'm going to be watching Diego Luna. He had, after the international break, first match, he kind of came in, scored a goal. And last week, I think it was their bye week. They were off, Real Salt Lake. But he's a guy that I think needs to heat up. He needs to get going. I don't think he's a roster lock by any means. I think he's a guy that's going to have to play his way in with his performance in MLS over this next month and a half. And so seeing if he can get going. I mean, like I said, he scored a goal in their last match. He needs to kind of keep that up. But he's a guy I'm watching, really closely over the next week or two. All right, Seth. Well, I will make sure and put links in the show notes to your work at USA Today Sports. Where are you sending people these days who want to follow you on the socials?
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky at S for Telny. So yeah, I'll be posting my work there.
Okay, cool. I'll make sure and link to that as well. Thank you so much for coming back on today.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.